Frederick Chopin. Chopin was born in Warsaw, Poland, or near Warsaw, Poland. And he started piano lessons when he was just a very small boy. The remarkable thing about all these composers that Stephanie's chosen, they all started out as being prodigies almost, right from the very beginning. Of course, Mozart was the greatest, but Chopin was also recognized as a pianist. He gave his first recital at age 8. And so he developed into a very creative composer and pianist. He traveled quite a bit. He went to England, just like Mozart traveled, but most of his traveling was done when he was a small child. Chopin was a little bit older, into the teen years, and he ended up in Paris. And he is actually buried in a cemetery there in Paris. When we were in Paris many years ago, I was fortunate to be able to find the cemetery, and I actually found his grave. So I have stood at Chopin's grave there in Paris. He developed a very unique style of playing and composing. He does a lot with ornaments. You'll hear in the prelude that Stephanie's going to play, each time the ornament is a little bit longer at the end of the first phrase, and he makes it very creative in it, the way he did. The way he played the piano himself was an absolute, just an experience to hear him play. He has been called the poet of the piano, and he practically wrote only for the piano. There were a few works that he wrote in which other instruments were perhaps involved, but most of his composition was done just for the piano. That was his instrument, and he absolutely used it to the very best of its ability. The piano was developed during this 19th century Romantic period, and Chopin was one of the great composers who helped to develop the piano and bring it in to becoming a solo instrument. Prior to that, the orchestra and orchestral instruments had been the most important instruments, but Chopin and some of the other composers, Mozart started, but he was mostly harpsichord to begin with. Pianos were very scarce in his day, and they were developed technically, became easier to play, and so Chopin took advantage of that. And he was one of the great pianists of his day, although he did not like to perform more than once a year. He did some teaching. He wasn't flush financially. He wasn't as bad off as what Mozart was, but he still was not a very wealthy man by any stretch of the imagination. He developed consumption, as it was called in those days, TB, and it is very sad to realize that this young man died at the age of 39. So all of our composers that we're using the piano today were prodigies to begin with, died at a very early age. And again, as with Mozart, I wonder had Chopin lived to the ripe old age of maybe 50, 60, what more beautiful music we would have had from him as well. Chopin wrote a number of different sets of music, and the set that Stephanie's chosen from is his preludes. And a prelude was a piece that just could speak for itself in many respects. It wasn't a prelude to anything in particular, not like we would say for church, the organist plays the prelude at the beginning. This is not that kind of a prelude. It's a prelude that often has beautiful melodies. And the common name of this one is the Raindrop Prelude. And as you listen to it, please listen to the raindrops. In the middle there's a storm, and it's one of the most beautiful storm pieces ever composed. And then the sun comes out at the end of the storm, and as I've said to her many times as she's playing it, think of suddenly the sun comes out and there's all the little raindrops on the flowers and on the leaves. See if you can imagine that as you listen to the Raindrop Prelude in B flat by Chopin.